Hi, I'm Simone. I go by she, her.
Sasika, I use she, they pronouns.
I'm Aiden, he, him.
And I'm Nomi, she, her, and we're Stan.
Yay! Okay, so today we're going to be talking about American Honey. So from IMDb, here's a little blurb. A teenage girl with nothing to lose joins a traveling magazine sales crew and gets caught up in a whirlwind of hard partying, law bending, and young love as she crisscrosses the Midwest with a band of misfits. So question number one. What overall techniques contributed to the film's naturalist form? Were any techniques not typical of naturalist form? And if not, how did they contribute to a theme?
Something I definitely felt was the very extended scenes, even though they didn't like. I'm saying I felt this, even like I noticed it, but I don't think I was actively bored because somehow something made it like feel like we were sort of in there. Like the first scene in the car where she joins them, that's a really long scene. I think it's over 5 minutes long. Um, but you don't really, and nothing really happens, but you don't really get bored at the same time. I think it's because you're following Star's perspective and when she's zoning out and looking out the window, and it just feels so real. It feels like you are her. And I think that's what makes it still enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It definitely, it's kind of like a documentary feel because they show the in between a lot of times. Sometimes they don't, a lot of things they don't show, but a lot they do show between changing locations, the car rides, waking up in the morning, going to sleep, the end of the day, beginning of the day, a whole day. But I think it was kind of interesting because it's very different than what I usually notice or what most movies are, which kind of made me notice that it was a movie. I was like, this is so long. Um, it, although it is meant to keep me in it, I noticed how they were adding more than most movies show. I think on another note, soundtrack played a big thing to adding, making it feel more naturalist. There was a lot of diatonic music, and when there was non-diatonic music, you noticed it. That kind of brought you out, and it kind of made you feel, I guess, more emotions opposed to that real world sounds of them just bumping music in the car.
There's also lots of direct shots of the ground, uh shots of looking up directly at the sky, and that felt almost real, very real because of things that you look at every day. I think part of the reason why it's so engaging is because you're sort of relating to it on as a human on every level. So it's sort of although the plot, it doesn't have a typical structure, even though it definitely did in some ways. I mean, obviously we can talk about that, but um that I think, yeah, being able to relate to it was really engaging. And also, I was gonna say something else. Oh yeah, the mise en scène, obviously, just them, the things that they're wearing, they just look like exactly what they're supposed to be. Yeah.
I also want to go back to the second part of the question that was what non typically naturalist techniques were used. I feel like in the beginning, and this is also going back to what Aiden was saying, that it has a bit of a documentary feel to it. It reminded me of Grey Gardens. In the scene where Star still living at home, um, they there's a bunch of shots when she's just doing her own thing. There's a bunch of shots of the photos in the fridge and you know, um, that felt very not naturalistic to me. It felt like we were observing from the eye of a filmmaker and not like we were one of the characters. But it still allowed us to have so much perspective. So I feel like it sort of balances out um, in what it provides us as the audience.
Yeah, I think as observers, we don't we aren't necessarily looking for like a theme or symbolism in naturalist pieces. Um, I mean, I feel like when we see certain shots that are too beautiful or like make us think, it doesn't necessarily take us out, but um, we consider the movie more. It makes you reflect and feel that realism. Um, you can tell how it's been curated, like how it's been made to feel that way, opposed to like complete natural observation, organic natural observation.
I think like in the beginning where like that sort of, I guess you could say like documentary style, it's like it to me it feels like her response to her like living situation. She doesn't want to like directly confront it and like look at, like her abuser, and but also when she's looking at the photos, it's like that contrast between like it looks like a good memory, but it's really not, and like it to me it feels a lot like her perspective, but like at a distance, because I think it reflects how she's coping with the trauma and how she's questioning it and thinking about it. Especially the scene where she is being abused, like you do see it at first, but as it progresses and she becomes more uncomfortable, the attention like goes away from what's actually happening, and like it shows the setting of the room, which yeah, in a way does feel, I think part of naturalism might not be able to like always show the perspective of the character, but it still feels like a natural, like a human response. Like it's reflecting what a human response would be. And we feel that.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I wanted to second that actually. I feel like this film does a lot to make sure the audience stays grounded despite like what a wild and insane story it is. Like you were saying, like when those traumatic scenes, in that traumatic scene, when it looks around, I feel like it allows people to allows the viewers to stay grounded in that reality and not get too caught up in, what's happening, because it's awful, obviously. And I actually was thinking earlier too about are you guys familiar with On the Road by Jack Kerouac? Okay, well, it's a book. It's a book, and it's about a guy. He's a beatnik. He's going around like from New York all the way across the country, pretty much just like doing what she's doing, pretty much. Just like he's trying to find himself though. And I just feel like these have a lot of overlap in the way that they both aren't like regular cinema. And I mean, not like they're not like Jack Kerouac's On the Road was very different from all the typical books that came out, and this one is very different from like the Hollywood movies that we know, in the way that they both have that like that type of naturalism, which doesn't have you in which you're told like a very insane and traumatic and exciting story, but you're able to stay grounded, which I think is really interesting. Okay, we can move on to the second question. What is Star's relationship interacting with others? And how would this compare in a non-naturalist film?
I sort of thought like she well, obviously like the way that she talked to people was very like natural, like the dialogue. And but I think her relationship with the man was like with Jake was very like not typical for like a typical like romantic trope. Like I think she's really self-focused in it, or I think she thinks she is, like she only wants she's only interested in the van trip, I think, really for the relationship, with the possibility of a relationship with Jake. And she leaves her siblings with like an unstable mother to go, which I think is like in two ways. Like I think it's good for her to be selfish in this moment because she hasn't like experienced her youth. But I don't know. And at the end, it's like the only way she realizes herself is by rejecting Jake. And I think it's all sort of revolves around Jake, which I think is sort of a realistic relationship, that like we're more self-focused than we think, and we might convince ourselves that we want a relationship with all the other people like in the van, but she really just wanted Jake.
I think that's a really good point. And that like the plot in that itself is so naturalistic. Just in that I feel like there would definitely not be like a realist movie with the same sort of relationship. But also to go back to what you were saying about her leaving and it being selfish, I didn't feel like it was selfish at all. Like I didn't feel like she was any more stable than anyone else um who could take care of the kids. I felt like it was like the only sane thing for her to do, like to leave, even though like it wasn't like a stable job in any way. Like it was much more stable than anything she seemed to have before. Um and like obviously like her dad was abusing her. Um I don't think that leaving that is like selfish in any way. Or it didn't feel that way to me.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. Like, I think that's the only thing that like option that she could do if she, but like in a way, it's like she did leave these like it's not. I don't think it's like her responsibility at all to like take care of the children because she's also a child. Like she's like only 18, and it would never should have been her responsibility. But yeah, I just felt like that was sort of like an ethical thing that she had to choose to do, which in some way it is selfish, but maybe in a good way, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh, I also thought it was really interesting to talk about Star and Jake's relationship initially, because I feel like in a naturalist film, it's really hard to see that light of like to describe like hope the same way that you, like someone with that like sort of man. Let me restart. I feel like the Jake and Star's relationship initially is really interesting to discuss because it's a very like from Star's perspective, it's very like hope filled. And even though we know as people who are not in the reality of her situation that this is not an end goal that you should have, like this is not ultimately desirable, like you still they're still able to show like this when she's offered that seat in the van, like you're still able to see in her perspective that this is something that could be so much greater than anything she's ever known, or like that sounds really dramatic, but but it's like it's a lot better. And I think like I'm not really sure how to describe how they did that, but I feel like it was really elegantly done. If you guys like have any notes on how they were able to maintain that like eye like like rose colored glasses sort of view that she has on them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I haven't really thought of about that specific, but I think just the fact that we're in her perspective, um, like form wise, like in her point of view, even like when she decides to join them and is like in the van for the first time, and like even just like the shots of her look the like shots of her looking out the window and then just like looking at the view that have no real plot content, but just like small things like that that make sure that we're always in her perspective. I think we just want what she seems to want, like that's the effect of that, like most directly. And so I think that we can't help but sort of like view it that way, like you were saying. So yeah.
I have one more thing about Star and Jake. If we're gonna talk about it, it might be uncomfortable, but the sex scenes I think were really important, because it was like there was no music, no like romanticization of it. It was very like you could hear it almost felt uncomfortably real, like uncomfortably so, because you could hear everything and like the things that they would say, and like you could even see like her like there was one point where it was just like a shot of the sun like shining through the trees, and like you like her perspective, and that's usually, and it didn't like always show like them. So I thought that was very different.
Yeah, I agree. And I kept like, I think we're so like used to realist films and like Hollywood films that we like, once they start having sex, we expect it to like cut to the next scene. And then the fact that it just kept going and kept it kind of caught me off guard. And I think in a way, the flaw of naturalistic films is that we're so not used to them that they can't help but feel a little bit like we're watching, like, we're just like conscious of the fact that this is like so new because I feel like there's so few naturalist films. And so, yeah, like the sex scenes totally like remind you, like, oh my God, like that you were like in like a theater with like your classmates and like you just really want this to end already. Um, yeah.
Okay, the next question is naturalism, realism, and formalism each have their own extremes. Is there a possibility for a film to exist between these forms?
I think the more I think about this, like the more I change my mind. But I think, yeah, the three of them are so extreme. Like realism is so extreme just in that it can't really like it has to like like stay within the rules of it, which are so strict. And then formalism is extreme just in that we can't like not notice it. Like it can't not be extreme in nature. And then naturalism is extreme just because I feel like all naturalistic films feel so similar to one another. Like when we started watching this, it instantly reminded me of the Florida Project, and like it's just so similar in so many ways that it makes it its own extreme. But I think it's also inevitable to make a whole film that is only in one of these um, styles. I don't know what they're called. Probably not styles. But I think it would be impossible. Like even in American Honey, like the scene where they're sitting on top of the car, and then the music turns to be non-diegetic, and they're sort of filmed from the outside, and then there's like a very harsh cut after that. That was not naturalist because we aren't like, within like how things would really feel if we were there. But I also think it was necessary and it made the film like um more touching and more um yeah, just more touching. So I think even though yes, it is possible to remain strictly within one style, I also think it would make a film just less good.
Yeah, when I think about that scene, like on the car and then the cut, like I sort of oscillate between like thinking if it's naturalist or not naturalist because, like, in some ways, that I think that cut like represents how like they're feeling so good in this moment, in the present moment, but then the next day they have to face like the reality of their lives. So it definitely contributes to the theme, but I think that part of it also is like realistic. Like, I mean, that's what they have to do. Like, they're feeling good in the moment, and then the next day, like, this is what they have to face. Like, I don't know. And I think when the sound becomes like diegetic, I was non-diegetic. I think that definitely reflects how we view music at times. Like, it sort of absorbs you when you're feeling good. And I think in that moment it felt right for it to become non-diegetic. And because when you're feeling in the present moment, you sort of tune in, and especially in the nighttime on a car ride or something like that. To me, I think in some ways it does actually feel naturalist, but I alternate between that.
Yeah, I feel kind of convinced by that now that you've said it, but I just don't like it definitely feels right in that moment for the music to turn non-diegetic, or is it, I don't know if it fully does turn non-diegetic, like, but either way what happens there, like especially with the cut after, it feels very correct, like that's what should happen. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if it does convert to realism for that scene, but it also does feel so natural. I feel like maybe it's a mix of the two. Um, yeah, but I don't think there's a definite answer for that.
Yeah, I wonder if it is possible for a film to be like complete, like not combine
I
forms,
actually
like,
feel
right?
I
Or
feel
we
like
can
that's
talk-
possible. Like not in this film, definitely not this one, but I feel like films like films that are styled like Wes Anderson's films, for example, those like highly curated and all the characters are characters, not real people, definitely lie in formalism because they can't do naturalism because they're not real people. They can't have a lens to real life because it's just straight up a story. And it can't be realism either because you're not observing real people. It's not very believable. It's just very pretty. So I feel like formalism can separate itself completely. But naturalism, movies that are naturalist can take like pieces of realism to make some to make point to take make to make certain points, like how you guys were saying that when the music was turning from diegetic to non-diegetic, that hint of realism, I feel like it really stuck with you guys. Like we keep talking about it after watching the film several days ago. So that I think that when it comes to formalism, there cannot be overlap. Otherwise, it would mess up with the continuity of the definition of formalism, and it would just not be good. It would just be a bad movie. And then, but like realism, naturalism can have some slight overlap.
I disagree. Just actually, what made me disagree is the Wes Anderson example. Even though, like, technically, yes, Wes Anderson has a lot of like formalist elements in his movies, it just like pains me to call him formalist just because like he's so, like it's not truly like it feels so like Hollywood. Like all of his film to me, they feel very Hollywood. Maybe because they're so popular. Um, but like there are still so many realist elements in his movies, like all the music and like the dialogue. It like it just doesn't feel right to me to call it fully formalist. And so I think maybe it's just like a question of opinion whether we think that movies can incorporate both or not. But to me,
Um,
yeah, sorry, go on.
no, you're speaking.
No, I have nothing else to
Okay.
add.
I agree with you. I think, but I think Wes Anderson is very much formalist, very, very curated, but there is an in-between where like with many movies where it's either a voiceover or a narration that disappears and a fourth wall break, a character that does fourth wall breaks, say like Deadpool or something, where there is a lot of moments in between where there is no fourth wall breaks where we're immersed, but then you kind of need that moment, that switch between being immersed and not being immersed. I guess to kind of, I guess, shock the audience. So I think it kind of is an in between, but they aid to each other. A realist perspective of, oh, we see the plot continuing without any elements that call us out, and then there is a moment that calls us out by speaking directly to us. I think I do think it's difficult to make a movie with strictly one perspective. Not exactly. I'd more think about this. I think there are movies that are strictly like we talked about Jean-Luc, and I think in terms of naturalism, there's plenty of documentaries that you can find that are strictly or natural, but there's always going to be realist elements to kind of convey a message in terms of documentary making, unless it's just like a recording of a forest and bird sounds for like an hour, you know?
If I could hop back in, I feel like maybe Wes Anderson might be a bad example, but I'm just trying to describe like those type of movies which are highly curated, which either are like like which are just lighthearted, like Wes Anderson's, or like if you guys have heard of The Holy Mountain or watched it, that's another movie that is highly curated, but it's to talk about like more philosophical things by telling it's another story. But that one is really high. It's highly curated. There's once again, characters are not people. Like it's very much like I feel like formalism to this to extreme extent can exist, and it's actually the type of films I really do enjoy because it's just so far from reality. So I feel like those can definitely exist, and I also feel like naturalism. Now that we've been talking about it for so long, I feel like naturalism can't really exist without a hint of realism. Because when I think about the documentaries I've watched, whether they're like about like I don't know like drugs or like nature, they all have like some scene where somebody's about to die and then the music comes in. So there's always that element of realism.
I think like what's interesting about realism, I think it takes like realist techniques, and at least this is what I felt, and makes them naturalist. Like I don't know. But I think one thing that's distinct between the two, which I've been thinking about, is that I think it's important to remain at a distance, like feel a little disconnected from it, even though it feels so realistic, because it's like a constant reminder of like you're also a person watching these people in their life. Like I feel like it's a constant reminder of that relationship, of that like relatability. Yeah.
I think something that's interesting about like being reminded you're watching a film. I think in some ways, at least to me, I'm so not used to watching complete naturalist films that it felt almost not formalist, but I noticed that it was a movie based on how hyper real, how naturalist it was being. Um, so in that way, I feel like it displayed elements of all three, whether that was intentional or not. And even when realism kicked in, you noticed it more because of how formalist other scenes were.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
I totally know what you mean. I think I always feel this way a little bit, like when watching naturalist movies, they just feel like because it's so natural and it feels so real, there's always in the beginning at least like something where you're so not used to it because most of them like I feel like 95% of the movies we watch are realist. And so we're so not used to it that we can't help but notice it. Um and I think the fact that this movie was like almost 3 hours long actually helped in that way that like as you're watching you just sort of get used to it and you stop being bothered by it. Like at first it kind of like annoyed me. Like I was like it felt like a you know what it felt like one of those like like short student films. Like not to like not to shit on film students because we are film students, but like it felt like trying to be super like edgy and like that annoyed me, but I feel like you just need to get used. And I feel like if there were more naturalist films, you know, it would be it would also work against itself because it would become more popular, which is like exactly the thing it's meant to not be, like unlike Hollywood films. But I think it would also be so much more powerful if we were more used to naturalist films.
That switch off of hyper naturalism, you saw or felt more when there was a cut in between time when it went from day to night. You were like, where did half the day go? I felt like itching, like I missed half of it because how much they actually showed when they did show the days.
Yeah. So next question. How does scene structure affect the form of this film?
I feel like we sorry, do you want to go?
I was gonna say, like, if no one has anything to say on this, we can go past it. Because honestly, I got too wrapped up in the realism, naturalism, formalism thing, and I got distracted. But okay, so question number 6. If the movie was created in a strictly formalist format, how would the message change?
I realize that I don't think you can create the same movie in a formalist format. Um, I think that within, I think the lens that you use is very aligned with what the story you're telling or what message you're creating. And the only way to kind of convey this is in a realist formalist format. I think if there were, I think it couldn't be strictly formalist. I think there maybe could be elements of voiceover to extend the plot, the message, give background. But I think the raw feeling aids in the theme so much.
Yeah, I also think like with formalist films, you can never really like predict what will happen just because they're so like the formalist elements of them are so intricate and so specific. You can't like I don't think it's something we can like picture and then say what the message would be. It would be something so like it would have to be made for us to be able to do that. Like and yeah, like Aiden was saying, I think it would be like impossible to make this movie formalist. Like it's not even that it would be totally different. It would just not be.
I mean, I think you can take like, I guess any basic theme, I don't know, any theme, and like they would be completely different films, but I think you can take any theme and use any type of technique to convey it. Yeah, but they would be completely different films, but I think you can still convey a similar message, but it would feel way different.
I think if it was a formalist film, the message would be more about like getting people out of her situation rather than like her story. Just because like I can't imagine like having a curated mise en scène and then like I just can't imagine how we'd be able to connect with Star on such a level in a formalist setting. So
We didn't mention the camera work, which I thought was it was sort of like handheld, like very like, which is kind of funny that a handheld feels natural because it's like another person like there watching them. Yeah.
Mhm. Another thing also I forgot to mention is I found the color really pretty, like really interesting too, because when I remember back when we were watching Moonlight, something about the like yellow hues in the in the film just creates like a sort of sense of hope and like new beginnings. So like when when Star is with that crew and like they're outside and like obviously like where they live it's just so hot and like vibrant. It just also added to that level of like of hope, and it didn't make me feel like ew, this is gross. The way she's living is super gross, and because I would never want to live like that. I was like, wow, I'm so happy for her. Yeah.
I think there were some moments that were like too beautiful, like I felt, oh, it's a movie, like when she was in the pond at the end and the fire illuminating them. But I think with the camera work, it was very interesting where they were able to provide many perspectives. Like even within the car, I feel like most car scenes, they usually have 1 to 2 camera perspectives. But within the car, there are many which made it feel realer in a way. Like it's an ecosystem in the car. There's everybody, different people speaking, different things going on.
Well, the thing that you said about like it being too beautiful, I don't know about you guys, but like I'm like a romanticizer of life, so like I think that's why I really I really love naturalist films, is because like I don't know, it feels like a very like just making everything beautiful, I guess.
I think they did a lot of making things not beautiful as well.
Yeah.
Which is why I feel it standed out. Yeah.
Oh, I just had one more thing to bring it back to that van scene you guys were talking about. I just really love how when it changes perspectives, it's like the cameraman is sitting in a different spot in the car, And like they don't do anything about trying to maintain the continuity of distance between the other shots. Like it just feels like, I don't know, you know when you have a memory that's old that you can't really remember so clearly. So it's like, I think I was here, I think I was over there. It just feels like I'm reliving a memory. So that was a really smart technique they used. Okay, so if there's no more questions to cover, I think we're all good. So bye. Yay.
Amazing.